This slide presentation is law enforcement within critical infrastructures. This slide presentation will be discussing the nation's federal, state, and local law enforcement as it relates to critical infrastructures and the importance of these agencies to have their own specific plans of action when it comes to protecting critical infrastructures, as well as by working with different agencies in the law enforcement community to provide better sharing of dialogue and information between different agencies. So let's first start by discussing counterterrorism. Counterterrorism efforts are used by law enforcement to deter, disrupt, or eliminate any terrorist threats before they become an issue. According to the U.S. Department of State, its Counterterrorism Bureau is tasked to promote U.S. national security by taking a lead role in developing strategies that are coordinated in an effort to defeat terrorism abroad before it has a chance to erupt here, as well as securing the counterterrorism cooperation of international partners. Every year, national law enforcement states that the Secretary of State must provide to Congress a complete report of terrorist activities by those countries that meet certain criteria, such as harboring terrorists, terrorist training camps. This is from the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Counterterrorism. Next, let's discuss law enforcement within critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructures, as well as their paramount systems and people, are important in the fact that they keep the United States secure. A loss or a cut in security resources places law enforcement in a compromising position with the inability to protect the country efficiently. Flores, Mason, and Nash, 2021. Additionally, this causes the resiliency in the country's system of protection to become weak, and the possibility of infiltration by criminal elements, either cyber or physical, becomes stronger. For example, in 2021 in Seattle, members of the community protested against the city for abandoning the autonomous zone and removing police and fire. And one of the federal buildings, all that were left to protect the structure, were marshals and agents from the Federal Protection Service who were locked into the building and had difficulty escaping the building as protesters threw Molotov cocktails into the building. Law enforcement agencies need to have critical plans of action when policing guidance is needed for such things as high-profile events. Basic planning, as well as managing events and incidents, are included in the Incident Command System, the ICS. The ICS module with FEMA plans themselves must be pliable, meaning that they can be changed without notice. Threat assessments must be taken to ensure that law enforcement has the number of attendees as well as having the number of officers needed to support event logistics. Dudley, 2021. Next, let's talk about the efforts to curb terrorist attacks. This comes from the Bureau of Counterterrorism. The Bureau of Counterterrorism's mission is to curb terrorist attacks before they have a chance to get started. The Bureau works in conjunction with civilians as well as entities around the world to counteract terroristic threats. U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Counterterrorism. The Division of Counterterrorism has assistance from global law enforcement entities that share information from government partners to counter terrorist acts efficiently, as well as build law enforcement capabilities to mitigate against attacks, as well as arrest, prosecute, investigate, and incarcerate terrorists. This is from the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Counterterrorism. When talking about the resiliency and protection of critical infrastructures, the Anti-Terrorist Assistance Program has been providing resiliency as well as protection of critical infrastructures since it was created in 1983. They work towards preventing terrorist attacks as well as mitigation response. The ATA assists our allies and partners around the world build critical counterterrorism skills through training courses, internships, critical target protection, and cybersecurity. This is from the U.S. State Department. The ATA uses a specific tool set as they work to deter, isolate, and destroy terrorist financial and support networks. The ATA, along with the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, is the go-to provider of anti-government terrorist training. As well, they provide equipment to nations around the world that partner with them to disrupt and deter terrorist activities while strengthening the law enforcement skills that are needed through counterterrorism skills training. Now, let's discuss FEMA within prioritizing emergency management. FEMA is the Law Enforcement Office of Integration Works by integrating law enforcement, private security, and emergency management communities by strengthening and enhancing their coordination abilities between themselves, FEMA, security, state, local, and tribal entities. The Office enhances communications between itself and law enforcement entities to analyze different requirements and needs to be able to best serve law enforcement by partnering, intelligence gathering, and support when law enforcement has decisions to make. The Law Enforcement Office of Integration also serves as senior staff liaison to all private security communities, as well as being an advisor of law enforcement to FEMA when responding to issues that require the National Guard or resources from the Defense Department. The office provides advice as well as training. DHS and FEMA trainers produce exercises and sign them specifically with law enforcement's needs in mind. Turning to response and recovery in critical infrastructure. To help with the response and recovery efforts, the Department of Homeland Security developed a crisis initiative known as CERA, which is the Crisis Event Response and Recovery. The CERA initiative assists local as well as state law enforcement and tribal enforcement to enable the handover of critical response supplies before, during, and after emergencies on any scale of size disaster. The framework for CERA has a specific way of dealing with issues that community law enforcement is having by managing and controlling access for their particular jurisdiction. Having consistency across the line to be able to coordinate fully with response and recovery organizations needs specific access through emergency or disaster zones, as well as coordination between the different law enforcement entities to have access implementation before, during, and after an emergency. This is CERA, Department of Homeland Security. When discussing cohesive collaboration and training within critical infrastructures with law enforcement, there's a need of cohesive collaborative training. The CRITAC, which stands for the Collaborative Reform Initiative, and the Technical Assistance Center that gets together different state, local, as well as tribal law enforcement entities to provide much needed technical assistance. Since its induction in 2020, CRITAC has had over 300 requests from agencies that are looking for proactive measures to ensure safety within their communities in areas such as de-escalation, school safety, active shooter situations, and wellness of law enforcement officers. We're now going to turn to aviation. There are different federal as well as local municipalities that handle security at our nation's airports. Since 9/11, the aviation industry has seen increases in how security is handled. The FBI, airport police, as well as the Air Marshal Service and the TSA all have different functions in how they handle security, as well as coming together when all law enforcement entities are needed during tragic times. Let's first discuss the functions of the TSA. The Transportation and Safety Administration handles the security of the flying public at all regional airports throughout the nation. The way the TSA is aligned is so that they can have cohesive plans at both strategic and tactical levels, and also so they can properly execute their missions. This comes from the Transportation and Safety Administration. The one thing noticed while I travel is that all the TSA had to get on the same page when it comes to screening procedures. At some airports, TSA agents will scan certain items such as small carry-on bags, while at other airports this doesn't happen. Even though agents do check IDs and tickets, this system needs a major overhaul. All of TSA should be uniform with their practices and procedures across the board. The FBI. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, which was founded in 1908, is the intelligence and security service of the United States. The agency's purpose is to investigate and prevent terrorist attacks against the country, as well as investigate cyber criminal activity, corruption. They also protect the rights of the public, as well as investigate and stop organized crime. This comes from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Protecting the country against attacks from terrorists and their organizations is a top priority for the FBI. The agency works with different stakeholders, as well as the security partners, to seek out terrorist cells. and operates here in the United States that look to wreak havoc on our nation's critical infrastructures. So let's talk more about critical infrastructures and the FBI. In 2001, then director of the National Infrastructure Protection Center of the FBI, Ronald L. Dick, made statements that were from the GAO and noted that even though there were many reports that spoke about strategic planning as well as tactics, there was still more work that needed to be done. There have been shortfalls when it comes to analytics. A new section officer was then assigned to work on the mitigation as well as prevention and detection that became a renewed focus of the NIPC to deter cyber terrorist attacks. Let's now discuss the airport police. The mission of the airport police is to protect the flying public when they are entering and exiting the airport terminals and the surrounding areas. They provide investigation and interdiction of this vital infrastructure and also from those that want to cause harm to this infrastructure. And they're always looking, and people who are always looking for ways to infiltrate its security protocols. The policing of today's airports need to be changed, so an airport experience will be better in the future for both the flying public and those that protect them. This comes from Police Chief Magazine. A useful tool that is being implemented on policing airports in the future is brainwriting. So what brainwriting is, it's a technique that was implemented in early 2018 and used in group settings so that the plan for emergency situations as well as protection can look issues as well as ideas that may impact them in the near future. Data is driven. Airport policing takes a proactive approach to ensure that the airport is safe by predicting what criminal activity is going to occur. Officers will then be placed at hot areas or suspected areas of activity to interdict and prevent crime. This, however, will be based on the intel as well as activity and also as well as the crime. Now we're going to be discussing the Federal Air Marshal Service and what they do as far as protection goes within critical infrastructures. The Federal Air Marshal Service works under the umbrella of Homeland Security and is responsible for securing the country's aviation infrastructural system. Their goal is passenger safety and responding to threats on board aircraft, limiting damage and loss of life. In addition to in-flight security, the Federal Air Marshal Service performs other critical roles such as visible intermodal prevention and response program that provides the TSA with vital information. Now we're going to be discussing protection of power plants as a critical infrastructure. The protection of power plant facilities in the United States falls to the protective forces of the federal government. These security officers are mainly contractors that are recruited through private companies. However, they are trained and provide equipment through the Department of Nuclear Energy Security Administration, the NSA. This comes from the National Nuclear Security Administration. There are 4 strategies employed by the NSA. Number 1, the first is ensuring that there is operational excellence, meaning that they strive to ensure everything is done right the first time. Number 2 is ensuring that they have an effective yet efficient nuclear security program. Third, revitalization and improving the physical security infrastructure, personnel, cameras, and their placement. The fourth, and the most important, is ensuring that the force conducting physical security are trained at the highest level and that training is ongoing. This comes from the NSA. Federal protection forces are tasked with safeguarding the nation's power plants. As stated before, these security officers are contractors who are recruited through private companies. These forces are run by the Nuclear Security Administration under the Department of Energy. The FPF is trained at the Department of Energy National Training Center in New Mexico. And there are different types of training that the security personnel get, such as training approval programs, firearms, and safety. Let's now discuss port security as it relates to critical infrastructure. The security of the nation's ports are of utmost importance. It depends on an intricate balance of competing needs. Maintaining security of these vital arteries to ensure the movement of goods are flowing normally require different agencies, including the Police Harbor Patrol, DHS, as well as owners and businesses. The DHS created the Center for its decisions based on strategic and tactical risks to reduce attacks of terrorism on the nation's ports. This comes from PortSec. Security risk and resource management systems, PortSec assists port security officers by performing risk assessments as well as allocation analysis so they are better able to balance their security measures along with the ongoing activity at the port. As an example of local agencies protecting ports, let's use the Port Police of the City of Los Angeles. The Port Police of Los Angeles is a specialized law enforcement agency that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to protect the Port of LA from air, land, and sea threats. They have canine officers as well for vessel searches, a full-time dive team for inspecting critical infrastructures, as well as a sea marshal program for inspecting all inbound and outbound cruise ships and cargo vessels. This comes from the Los Angeles Port Police. No date. Communications is an important critical infrastructure. Physical security within the communications sector is provided by the NSA, the National Security Administration. There are two functions that the NSA has. The first, SIGINT, which provides foreign signal intel, and COSMIC, the communication security. That's from Landau 2012. Physical layer, or PHY, PHY, has become a solution to wireless communication security problems. The idea of PHY security is to increase the amount of information between the user and transmitter while reducing the amount of information that an eavesdropping person on the other line are trying to obtain. There are other advantages to PHY. Interestingly, not only does it have secure key code techniques, but it also has systems that do not require encryption or decryption codes. Ping et al. 2022. Now, when we discuss financial services within critical infrastructures and who protects them, the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council, who was established in 2002, were brought about by financial institutions to work with key government agencies coordinating both Homeland Security and critical infrastructure activities within the financial service industry. The SSCC, the United States Treasury Department, is a specific government agency in coordination with the Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Risk Protection that handles security as well as resilience of the financial services sector. The office works closely with different companies and industry groups within the financial sector as well as government partners to gather and share information of vulnerabilities, physical threats, as well as incident response and recovery. When we talk about the dam sector protection area of critical infrastructures, the dam sector of the United States critical infrastructure is made up of assets such as dam projects, navigation locks, levees, hurricane barriers, and other similar water control facilities. The dam sector had different dependencies and interdependencies. The Office of Infrastructure Protection, IP, that is part of DHS, serves as the SSA for the dam sector. This is from the NIPP 2005. The DSCC is the focal point for the communications as well as coordination between the federal government, who watches over the sector, as well as private owners and operators who assist. The DGCC, that started in 2005, is comprised of federal and state agencies that partner with the DSCC to help with the planning and execution of the sector's security programs. The program provides a structure in which both federal and private entities can work together and share information on sector improvement. Now, we're discussing government facilities and who protects those critical infrastructures. One important law enforcement entity is the Capitol Police. As an example, we're going to use Washington, D.C. The nation's federal buildings, the Capitol Building, the White House, the Library of Congress, Treasury Building, and the like are protected by various sources of federal authorities. For example, in Washington, D.C., the Capitol Building is protected by the Capitol Police, which we just mentioned. Enacted in 1828, the Capitol Police Department protects the grounds, as well as members of Congress and the Senate, and the people who visit Capitol Hill. This comes from the Capitol Police Strategic Plan 2021 through 2025. The department's strategic plan is to ensure all goals are met and achieved and built into the way the Capitol Police are run. The first goal is to invest in the police force. The focus is on hiring and developing as well as training a high-performing workforce. The United States Secret Service is another agency that handles critical infrastructures. The United States Secret Service is tasked with dealing with Treasury Department business, such as financial investigations. Ultimately, though, the Secret Service is tasked with infrastructure protection of the President of the United States and their families, as well as the White House and its grounds. The missions of the Secret Service is accomplished through various divisions. The Secret Service has uniform divisions. Generally, they'll be seen safeguarding the exteriors of such areas as the White House. They'll be found on the grounds and near exits and entrances. They will be on motorcycles. Foot patrols as well as canine officers will be deployed to protect the President and his family. The Federal Protection Service, their purpose is to be on site security and to safeguard the nation's monuments, federal courthouses, and other of the 9,000 federal facilities across the United States. This comes from the Federal Protection Service. The FPS is a federal law enforcement agency that protects federally owned and facilities that are released by the government, as well as protection of government employees. This comes also from the Federal Protection Service. The FPS comprises more than 1,300 law enforcement officers, security specialists, special agents, as well as mission support staff. We're now going to be turning to the emergency services sector. The Department of Homeland Security serves as the emergency services sector specific agency, the ESSSA, that lead the protection of the emergency services sector. The CISA. The 5 primary areas of the ESS are law enforcement, fire, rescue, emergency medical services, as well as emergency medical management and public works. Extremists are constantly targeting emergency services personnel, along with crowded venues as well as public areas. This comes from the CISA. Local efforts on curbing the violence falls under the collaboration between the Emergency Government Council, the GCC, the Sector Coordinating Council, the SCC, as well as working groups, all working closely together to implement and execute resilient security programs within the emergency services sector. Next, when we're talking about the defense industrial base, as far as protection within critical infrastructure, the defense industrial base is handled by the Department of Defense and refers to the collection of both large and small businesses that provide the materials and weapon systems needed to defend the nation. The Defense Industrial Base Specific Plan details how the plan of action is implemented between each characteristic as well as the landscape of each sector. This comes from the CISA. For example, companies such as Skunk Works and Boeing are 2 companies that supply equipment to our nation's military for defense. These companies generally have their own contracted security force that handles everything from perimeter security to security inside the facilities. In 2010, the Defense Industrial Base Specific Plan was enacted in conjunction with HSPD and the DHS. A framework from the NIPP was developed, and a framework that would protect all levels of government, including the Defense Industrial Base, the CISA. The next slide we'll be discussing about critical infrastructure and law enforcement is food and agriculture. According to the CISA, the food and agriculture sector is protected by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA is responsible for the public ensuring the health, safety, and security of the nation's food supply. The FDA provides science-based health information to the public sector. In March of 2019, the FDA reorganized its operational implementation. Its modernized structure to assist in meeting its mission in promoting and protecting the public health, as well as meeting challenges across numerous industries regulated by the FDA. This comes from the Food and Drug Administration. Having this reorganization provides the FDA to realign with numerous agencies to promote their strategic priorities and will promote the different roles within its center offices as well as field offices. When we're discussing water systems and the protection of that critical infrastructure, water systems are protected and regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency with assistance from the Food and Drug Administration. But ultimately, it's the EPA's job to stop cyber criminals from tampering with the waterworks. The EPA does this by improving the ability of water and wastewater utilities to function correctly. This includes the disruption of water to municipalities. For instance, in the city of Los Angeles, the security of the water department falls on DWP security officers since 2003. 2 additional helicopters, plus the Department of Emergency Services, added additional officers to patrol main water facilities to ensure that they are protected. This comes from Waterworld 2003. Now, when we're discussing chemical facilities protection within critical infrastructures, this falls under the CISA. Now, ensuring that security and resilience are effective, it's got to be crucial. The risks of the danger of chemicals being used to be turned into weapons is a constant threat. The CISA has worked to develop regulatory programs that will assist stakeholders as well as private industries and public sectors and law enforcement. There's certain threats that can be seen or attacks from insider threats as well as diversions that will be used to obtain chemicals such as explosive weapons. The EPA mission responsibilities also falls under preventing, limiting, or mitigating chemical, oil, radioactive, and or biological materials in the aftermath of an accident. The CISA works closely with the EPA handling these various issues. This comes from the CISA. As of July 28, 2023, Congress allowed the authority for the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terrorism Standards to expire. With this, the CSA at this point in time is unable to report their chemicals, performing inspections, or providing compliance assistance. The CISA does ask that all facilities maintain their vigilance and still keep all the security standards and practices in place. This comes, again, from the CISA. Now, in conclusion, all critical infrastructures have specific law enforcement agencies that assist in their protection. This is to ensure the resiliency as well as being able to bounce back before, during, and after a crisis. Critical infrastructures within the United States are large and vary in size, and there will always be challenges in protecting these vital systems. In many instances, different factions of law enforcement are watching these infrastructures, but only with a coordinated effort can these systems be kept safe within the United States.